Welcome to the Leadership Table, where leaders from all walks of life come together to share their journeys, insights, and lessons that they have shaped them in their leadership journey. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Hairston, and I'm honored today to have with us a voice that many would say knows Columbus very well. He's been a tireless advocate for our community, a former mayoral candidate, and a longtime resident of Columbus, Ohio. Please join me in welcoming to the table Mr. Joe Motil. Joe, thanks for being here with us at the Leadership Table.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, Joe, let's jump right into it. Can you describe for me and all those who are listening, what set you on the path of this particular journey? What enabled you to become the advocate that you are today?
I guess, first of all, I'd like to just touch on my background because I'm one of 11 children that grew up in Clintonville. My father was a union carpenter. Of course, my mother was a parent at home taking care of 11 kids. And we were your typical middle-class family. I mean, but growing up, I'm 69 years old, so I grew up in the 50s and 60s. And we weren't a family of with a lot of money, of course. We kids, my brothers and sisters, we wore hand-me-downs and patched jeans and things of that nature. So, but we were fed well and we had a home, and my parents wanted to have a large family because my father didn't enjoy that growing up as a child because he spent time in foster homes here at St. Vincent de Paul Orphanage on East Main when it was open, and also living with foster families and such. So one of the reasons to have 11 children. So, I think growing up in that type of environment and understanding, the need for affordable housing and clothing and food on the table and things of that nature. And growing up kind of rough, and not having a lot of things that other kids had, set me on the, gave me a good understanding in terms of the difference between, the social and economic imbalances within our country, within our city of Columbus, especially. And, growing up as a kid and as a teenager and a young man, you have confrontations where you're treated unfairly at times. And, my mother, I think, was a really big influence on me in terms of fighting for what's right and for standing up for myself and speaking out. I can remember times when she would be angry about somebody who treated us unfairly and would say things and so forth. So I think that was kind of like the beginning of it, if you would. And I worked as a union laborer for 26 years. And the last 14 years of my 40-year construction career, I worked as a construction safety manager on 5 very large projects that were all over $100 million, where I was responsible for safety on the construction site for the construction manager. So in doing that, working as a union construction laborer, and then also being able to interact as a professional white-collar worker for 14 years, gave me a really eye-opening experience in terms of the difference between the two, and just how much somebody as a union laborer has to struggle, in life into making ends meet. My wife worked in retail. She didn't make a lot of money. We raised our 2 children while I was working as a laborer. And, back in those days, back in the mid 80s to 90s, we were able to purchase a home and things of that nature, and give our kids piano lessons and karate lessons and things of that nature. And now I see how difficult it is for the younger people that are struggling to make ends meet. And it's just how much things have changed over the years. But in terms of my community involvement, it actually began in 1985 when I was renting an apartment on South Campus. And I was at the laundromat, and a gentleman approached me. He asked me if I lived nearby, and of course I did. You walk to the laundromat. And this was on Worthington Street in South Campus near 8th Avenue. And he asked me if I was aware of the fact that a local landlord was going to tear down a couple of doubles that had just been recently renovated. And he actually hired some kids to vandalize them and peel off the aluminum siding and stuff like that and break the windows. And he wanted to justify to the city to tear those two structures down so that he could build an extremely large apartment building. And so he brought me into, I was aware of, I've seen what happened, but I didn't know. And he explained to me. And he took me and a friend of his to the Beacon building at Gay and Front, which used to be where the Department of Development was. And I was there for support to say, yeah, I'm against this. They shouldn't happen and blah, blah, blah. And that is really where it started there in terms of, what was going on with developers. DeSantis was a huge landlord at the time. All of his apartment buildings that he owned were like a chocolate brown, if you may recall. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't him, though. It was somebody else. And so I began to understand, and they were tearing down these Victorian homes down there in South Campus area, beautiful Victorian homes, and building apartments and things. And I'm a preservationist, and I'm just like, what is going on? So in 85, I moved from my apartment where I had lived for 8 years on South Campus to Oakland Avenue, which I found out was just a beacon of just activism, people that taught at Ohio State. 80 to 90% of the homes on Oakland and Northwood between High and Indianola, where I lived, were single-family owner-occupied. Now it's probably about 20%, if it's that many. Mm-hmm. But that's where I began to understand more about historic preservation, development, what was going on. At the time at City Council, there was people like Ben Espy, Cindy Lazarus. They were on City Council and such. So all the demolitions that were taking place in the university area, we actually were able to convince them to put a moratorium on demolitions. And because of what was going on, the new apartments that were being mm-hmm. built, there wasn't the kind of like zoning code and thing that would say, okay, you have to have so much green space here, blah, 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 trees and what have you. So they did. They agreed that it had to be stopped for a while until we could come to some kind of agreement with the developers in the community and such. So that's kind of where I started. From there, I ran and was elected to the University Area Commission in the late 80s. I was the zoning chairman. I served as the co-chair of the Columbus Historic Resources Commission in the early 90s. I would also serve on the Clintonville Area Commission. I have been the president of the Tuttle Park Recreation Council, or now Friends of Tuttle Park, for the last 33 years. So, I've served here and there and done those types of things. I understand how city government operates for 40 years now.
So you've had a long history of not just being a resident of Columbus, but watching the landscape change in terms of, the relationship between development and growth and maybe even some setback, because you just mentioned about, one neighborhood at one point in time being a majority of single family homeowners to now being probably owned by a lot of companies right. who are renting it out to maybe young people or other families. But let me ask you this. In terms of just leadership, when you name some names, Ben Espy, Cindy Lazarus, you name some other people who perhaps came along that journey, man, from the 80s to the 90s to where we are right now, do you believe that there is a certain skill set? I mean, again, to where you are right now and some of the things that you've done, and you look back and go, when I think of great leadership, these are the qualities that should exist inside of a person. And if these qualities are missing, maybe perhaps we don't have as great a leadership as maybe we might want to have.
Right. And I think what's important is that people truly understand the type of issues that they're rallying behind. Mm-hmm. And you have to look at both sides. You got to look at the pros and cons. And I do that. And I also do my research on what I think is right over one or the other in terms of pursuing that and trying to get my message out there and saying, look, everybody right now, I have to say this because a lot of our elected officials here in the city of Columbus and in the county, they're either appointed or they're brought up, as going to take, answer to the same people. and they really don't understand fully some of the issues that are coming before them. They're there to promote the issues that others are who are in control of policy in Columbus and that are pushing. And they're there to make sure that those policies go through. We have to find more independent-minded people that are going to come out and say, "Nah, this really isn't working. This is what we need to try." Because even if you look at some of the nonprofits within the city of Columbus, whether it's let's say affordable housing, everybody's in line with the same thing that the city's saying. There's no difference of opinion in terms of, well, why don't we try this? Like, for instance, I was involved with a campaign for rent control, and with a number of people from across the city, John Beard, David Harewood, Sarah Robinson, and others. And we tried to get this on the ballot. We had a meeting with John Melke, who was at the time the executive director of the Building Industry Association, the BIA. And at that meeting, this was a few years ago, John informed us, he's a lobbyist, and he said, "You guys probably don't know this, but rent control is being preempted by the state of Ohio." And we looked at each other like, "You've got to be kidding me." Well, people like the Columbus Partnership, Steve Gladden from the Columbus Realtors, Buffy Patterson, Brent Crawford from Crawford Hoying Developers, they all lobbied heavily to get this removed so that rent control cannot be used in the state of Ohio. So the state legislature, they stopped it.
Right.
And right now, when you look back at what we were trying to do, there was like limits in terms of how much money you can make, and there was caps on things. It's all in the details in terms of how it's formed that can make it successful. And if you look now, what's going on, I think rent control would have been a great tool in the toolbox to address our affordable housing crisis. Because look at the rents and how bad they are.
Right.
And so that's just, again, that's another thing. Everybody hears rent control and they think, "Oh my gosh, we can't do this. This is going to kill things and blah, 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 blah." Well, that's because all the market rate developers didn't want it, because they didn't want anybody telling them how much they couldn't charge for rent. So again, like I said, the devil was in the details. We were willing to work with developers, which is why we met with John to discuss this and what would be, how he would feel about, compromise here and there and stuff. So again, you need to hear both sides. You need to stick to what you believe in. And,
But let me ask you this. When we hear those things, I mean, we can go around the country and we can see what they're doing in Texas in terms of trying to gain more seats from a Republican perspective. When we look at Franklin County, when we look at the city of Columbus, we look at it and we can say it's very Democratic hand. Right. Some would even suggest that the infusion of the sample ballot that is passed out, during Election Day tilts towards the Democrats in this particular city. Again, we could name all over our country where it's tilted either way. How do you then, let me go back to my question, how do we develop leaders that and I use the word develop, but how do you get inside of a system that you just described? You're sitting down with all of these, heavyweights, inside of the affordable housing industry, only to hear them say, "But the state came out with this particular, perspective." How do we develop, Joe? Do we develop new leaders who have a different perspective, or especially when we're talking about the machine is producing its own leaders who are going to step in and say some of the same language, or like in Elon Musk's case, it takes a multi-billionaire who says, "I want to create a third party," which quite honestly probably will never take place, but I want to create another system that infuses another perspective, but all the people that me and you know who may have a mind frame outside the normal Democrat, outside the normal Republican, we don't have the finances. We're going up against a machine that was built before us, has more money than us, and more political savvy than us. How, in your perspective, how do we infuse that? Do we gotta come with a lot of money? Do we gotta develop new leaders? How do we break that system that you talk about?
It's very, very difficult. I can tell you right now. I mean, you talk about, like, for instance, changing campaign finance laws. Right. I mean, the city will hold a public hearing on making changes. And we go down there, people like myself, and say, okay, there needs to be a limit on how much contributions are. There needs to be a limit on in-kind contributions, which is the way they get around the contribution limit, which was evident in, for instance, this race, the city council race, and other races too. I mean, people don't quite understand. Most people don't understand how campaign finance works and how people can contribute to a campaign without it being actual money directly as a contribution.
Right.
In-kind contributions are unlimited
Right.
in the city of Columbus. So they can give $50,000 of an in-kind contribution to pay for somebody's TV time or radio time and such, or for their literature. And it's not an actual contribution, which right now I think the limits in the city of Columbus are just like $15,500 roughly, something like that. And it goes up every year. So it's like, sure, that's one thing. And, we've talked about using public access television, to allow candidates airtime.
Right.
And I mean, because they can't afford TV time.
Right.
And when somebody like Andy Ginther comes out and says, I'm anti-crime and anti-police and this, that, and the other, I have no way to get out there and say, that's not true. That's not what I said. He's mixing up my words to make it sound like this. And unfortunately, the local media establishment in Columbus isn't going to air your comments either, because they're basically, as I've said this numerous times, the whole city's in bed with one another.
Okay.
And so it's virtually impossible for somebody like me without those finances to actually, get on the local media. Sure, we can do it on social media and things like that. I can have my own Facebook Live video or do YouTube. And, sure, those things are effective to some degree. But like you said, unfortunately, it boils down to money.
Right.
And,
let me jump right there. I mean, because I know you ran for mayor, some time ago. What inspired you? I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of offices out there. You've been involved in Clintonville. You've been involved from a commission standpoint. Why the mayor's office?
Well, first of all, you may not know this, but my first election was in 1995, 30 years ago.
Okay.
When I got off the University Area Commission and was still living on campus, I saw what was going on with the city, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. We can't get money for improvements on High Street, trash cans, this, that, or the other, and everything going on. And I saw it then that the only way that I felt I could truly be effective was if I was sitting in one of those 7 leather chairs up there in council chambers. And I had no idea what I was getting into. And a neighbor of mine, Judge John Marshall, lived up the street, and a good friend of mine to this day. And I asked him, I said, hey, I want to do this. What's going to happen? And I'll never forget, he said, Joe, the Democrats are going to hate you. And because you may flip the election by getting, because running against their endorsed candidate. So real quick, the electorate was quite different back then. There were Republicans on city council in 1995. And so I got enough signatures to get on the ballot. Lisa Griffin was the appointed council member by John Kennedy, who was the president of council at the time. And long story short, Bill Shutko was mayor, and they threw a lot of money into the Republican candidate Peggy Fisher's campaign, and because I was running, and they thought I might be a spoiler, and in fact I was. I got 11,000 votes. Lisa Griffin lost by 8,000, and that was the last time an incumbent lost a race in city council. So that was the beginning. And then, oddly enough, in 1998, the Democratic Party endorsed me to run for state representative in my district, 27th district. And I was running against the candidate who was being term limited, because that was the beginning of term limits. He had served 16 years, E.J. Thomas, as a state rep. And my intention was to run again in 2000 after, he was gone after that year. I got 41% of the vote. I did really well. It was a 65-35 district, Republican at the time. And so 2000 came around. They didn't endorse me. They endorsed my friend and neighbor, Mark Hatch, who was the president of the school board at the time. And they started saying things to me like, you should run for school board, get your name out there, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to be on the school board. And 2 years later, I said, I've had enough of this party stuff. I said, I'm no longer involved. I saw what was going on. I wasn't going to sell my soul to these people, and I was going to, do what I thought was right, and nobody was going to control my issues and how I feel about things. So, Judge Eileen Patey, who was a good friend of mine at the time, back then, she said, "Joe, you went to the dark side." And I said, "Eileen, I love it over out on the dark side." And she said that jokingly, of course.
But I want to ask you because I can see it from even social media. You are not a big fan of the current mayor.
No.
I mean, is it just a discuss with all of the policies, or do you feel as though because of their hold on elected positions that just puts a bad taste in your mouth?
Well, he's been at City Hall now, I think 17 years as a city councilman, city council president, and mayor. And as far as I'm concerned, he just lacks total leadership in terms of in ideas and thoughts. He's basically, as far as I'm concerned, he's controlled by the powers that be, the big money that really runs this city, developers, corporations, and such. Sure, you got to work with these people. I don't disagree at all with that. But what are you really doing for the middle class in the neighborhoods that are suffering? And I see an inequality of tax funds that are being distributed to the rich and to protect their investments as opposed to protecting and enhancing the investments in our neighborhoods, especially, like the South End, the Linden area, West Side, Hilltop. We tend to get the leftover crumbs in terms of that. We don't have the granite curbs and brick intersections and fancy street lights and stuff like that in our neighborhoods. I mean, and now he's doing something in terms of this, some kind of a corridor plan that, addressing the corridors, and he's throwing money into them. This is something that should have been going on for decades, years. There's been disinvestment in these corridors like Livingston Avenue, Cleveland Avenue, Parsons Avenue, and such. And all of a sudden, he's throwing some money out there and having a big photo op and saying, "Look what we've done this week," or over the last month. These have to be long-term plans that are put into place. And our neighborhoods have been just disinvested for decades, for too long, and he's been there for a long time. So
let me ask you this: sure. I read this book several years ago, and it was the writer. He's talking about the political landscape, across the country, and he's an African American writer, and he gives an example of a well-known African American figure who was running for a national office, and he goes, this guy knows he's not going to win. He doesn't have the financial backing, but he's on this national platform. And so this book writer, he makes an opinion inside of his writing, and he says, but this particular person, had they run for an elected office in their state or in their city or in their county, was sure to win and could have made a difference in that particular area, but yet they're running on a national platform in which they know out of 12 candidates, they're not going to get the nod. And so if somebody came to you, Joe, and said, "Joe, you're running against some machinery that Mayor Ginther, man, is a part of. I mean, no matter what you do,"
right,
as you said, like even with the television ads, and now we have social media and all that kind of stuff like that, you're not going to get the nod, whatsoever. But maybe perhaps you could have been effective in this particular area. Would you say they're right, or would you still say, "Hey, my conviction led me to run regardless of the outcome"?
Well, your convictions, I think, are more important. And I did start out, as a city council member. I don't think that's, jumping the gun in terms of what else you're going to run for. A school board seat. Again, both my children went to Columbus Public Schools. And that just, that's not where my convictions were. It was with city government and state government at the time. Senate Bill 1 was going on at the time when I think it was Kasich, they were trying to take away the unions within state government and such, and that was it never happened or was defeated or something. I forget, clear back then. But that was a real big issue at the time with me, and other state issues. So I I think you have to stick to your convictions. I mean, at no time did I ever think I was going to lose my mayoral's race. I have never thought I was going to lose a race that I ran in for city council, state rep. Now, as a write-in candidate a few times, sure. I mean, but I did that with the hope of getting my message out, going to candidates events, and so people could hear what I was saying. And to some degree, that's effective, but not entirely, because how many people go to candidate nights in the first place? How much coverage is there by the press? How much fair coverage is there by the press? And how much of the press is actually going to cover the race? So there's a lot of things like that. But now, I hear what you're saying, because I've heard people say the same thing about Morgan Harper. She ran for Congress, she ran for U.S. Senate. Could she get elected as a city council member or a school board member? Very possibly. She has a lot of connections. She knows she knows who the consultants are for fundraising and stuff like that. And she could get a really strong campaign team behind her. She knows how to do that. She's very organized and well versed in that kind of thing. So.
Well, and I'll tell you the answer that particular person said. It really impressed me, and they said, without necessarily saying I know I was going to lose, what their response was that had I not been on this platform, there were certain issues that would never have been talked about. And so he suggested that I was running, not so much to say, hey, I know I'm going to lose and I'm trying to lose, but I'm running because while I'm in this race, these candidates are talking about issues that would normally get skipped over, that he felt was important to talk about, who affected local people. And because he was in the race, they kept talking about those particular issues. And so that brings me to this question, tax abatements. In your opinion, how does the city deal with developers, tax abatements, and the school system? If you had a formula and they said, Joe, we're going to let you come up with the solution of how we deal with tax abatements because we need them in order to help our city grow, or in your opinion, maybe we don't need them. I don't know. But Joe, if you could write the formula, what would you say?
Well, first of all, I would say that major corporations, Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 1000 companies, AEP, Huntington, Cardinal Health, Abbott Labs, there's several here in Columbus area. They don't need a tax abatement. They're not going anywhere. That's nonsense. That's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, they've been here for so long. Do you know how much it would cost for a company to just up and move their, let's say UPS, they have to be located here in Franklin County somewhere. It only makes sense for that company to have a facility, trucking industry there. They're the largest provider for transportation of that stuff in the world. So why do they need a tax abatement? They're not going to say, well, we're going to move our facility to Indiana. No, they need to be located here in Columbus. Columbus has so much going for it, too, because they're located within 47% of the U.S. population within a 10-hour drive. So geographically, it's perfect. And also very close to Canada. And the colleges and universities, Ohio State, I think there was like 50 of them within an hour of Columbus. So, I mean, there's so much that people don't understand why certain data centers and warehouses and stuff like that locate here. It's because of its geographic location. It's perfect. And the people that understand that know that, and that's why they come here. So why are you giving them a tax abatement? Everybody's given the same tax abatement. So, you're going to say they're not going to if they don't get a tax abatement? No. Google, they located out there at Hartman Farms near the old Scioto Downs. They got over $50 million tax abatement. They're only going to create like 20 to 30 jobs, for this humongous facility. So, no. Tax abatements, I think they're good to build affordable housing. Truly affordable housing, 60% AMI and less. Use them there. Yes, I agree. I think tax abatements should also be given out to apartment owners that will maintain affordable rents. And if they maintain a certain, you dictate, what that affordable rent is. If they maintain an affordable rent, you give them a tax abatement. So in terms of that, tax abatements were created in the 90s for blighted areas to encourage economic development. All right. Now they're abused. You don't need them in the short north. All right. You don't need them downtown. You don't need them on the Scioto Peninsula. Places like that. You don't need them in the Arena District. These places are booming. So they're being abused. Yes, use them in areas like, for instance, I had no issues with Rogue Fitness at 5th and Cleveland. That was an area the Milo Grogan neighborhood needed an economic boost. And Rogue works with the Milo Grogan community in terms of getting employees that live in the neighborhood and such. That's a good example of one, I think. There was also one given to a telemarketer where the old Mount Carmel West Hospital used to be. And that would be another example of a good use of a tax abatement. But right now, and I know people that know these developers personally, and they're making money hand over fist because of these tax breaks. And plus the property tax breaks that are given in the East Side, Near East Side, other places, drives up the property taxes of seniors and those on fixed incomes that live nearby. You got somebody with a brand new, modern looking home that's $900,000 over there in Bronzeville, let's say, and then the homeowner that lives next door or a couple of houses away, their property taxes go sky high. That person's paying $1,000 for their $900,000 home in terms of property taxes, $1,000 to $2,000, and I'm not exaggerating. And the other person probably paying just as much for their beautiful 4-square home that's probably could be worth $400,000 or something. There's so much inequity, and it's gotten out of hand completely.
Let me ask you this, Jen. This is our final question. When you think about, because you were going back to even the machinery, and even making the suggestion that, even those that are being developed, they're being developed to kind of stay in line with whatever messaging the party is saying. If a young person is making a decision to run, and we're going to see that in city council races, we're going to see that in Columbus City School races, we're going to see that, we have 3 potential people, including the current incumbent mayor, that could possibly be running for mayor. We're going to see countywide, statewide reps maybe switching positions and things that, in that sense, in the state house. What would you say to those emerging leaders who go, Joe, I know that I got to stay in alignment with what the party says, but let me get there. And then I promise you, I'm going to think about you when it comes to affordable housing. And I hear this, too, from a pastoral perspective. They go, let me get there, and I'm going to make some changes at the State House. Let me get there, and we're gonna lead the school board a different way than it has been traditionally. And as I was telling one particular person, I said they just tell you perhaps what you want to hear, and then they get there and they stay in alignment. But what would you say to that emerging person who wants to be involved in local politics, but says, Joe, let me get there, and I promise you, I'm going to make some changes.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because that's what I said earlier, touched on. That's what was said to me. Mm-hmm. Run for school board, get elected, and then once you get elected, you get your name out there, then you can go ahead and go on your own. You're not dependent on the party so much to get you reelected. Now, the problem with what you're saying is if somebody like that actually does do those types of things and fades away from what the party's saying, okay, you need to support this. Let's say it's a city council member, and they're voting no on things all of a sudden, and they're pushing against, what the mayor and the policy and the other council members are behind. Next time the election comes up, they're going to run somebody against them, and they're gonna make sure that they don't get elected. They're going to punish them, and it's been proven. Cheryl Brooks, when she was a county commissioner, what was the gentleman that there was another auditor, not the auditor, but his name was Brown, Zach Scott, for instance, as sheriff. They ran Sheriff Baldwin against him because of him running against Ginther. And so they're going to come after you if you do that. But it's funny because in '95 when I ran for council, Maury Portman was a city council member. I don't know if you remember him, but a long time served in the administration with Sensenbrenner back in the day, and he told me he actually supported me when I ran for council, and he was a council member in '95, but he could be outspoken because he had enough people behind him that were going to vote him back into office, and he didn't have to worry about it. And he could go to say, no, this is wrong. We're going to stop. Bill Moss. I mean, he was another perfect example of it, that he could be outspoken he did eventually lose. The establishment hated the man because he spoke the truth. And so he was like that. But again, they're going to come after you if you go, I would say if you go too far. So you got to work within the system to a degree, but how far? I have this discussion. I hear some council members say things to me. Oh, they sound real tough, and they're going to stop this and not vote on this and this, that, and the other. And when push comes to shove, it doesn't happen. I haven't seen anything like that in a long time. Jeanette Bradley was a Republican councilwoman. That was refreshing because she spoke out against things. She had that opportunity, and she brought things to light, and the press couldn't ignore it because she was a city councilwoman. And so, that's what's needed. We need to hear different ideas. We don't need a city and county ran with the same people aligned with everything, no different types of ideas, but we all just say, yeah, this is what we're going to do. We need this, we need that to correct this. It's like the affordable housing thing. I get so irritated in hearing all these people say the same thing over and over, and I don't see anything changing. Homelessness is on the rise. Evictions are on the rise. The number of affordable units went from 54,000 to 58,000 units, and it's going up. I understand. I don't disagree with some of the things the city's doing, but I want to hear one of those leaders give me a timeline in terms of when are things going to turn around. And they always point their finger back at somebody, whether it's the State House or it's lumber, it's wages, it's interest rates, it's this. But they're still building market rate apartments all over the place. So what's going on? It just everybody, like I said, and I hate to put it this way, but they're just so much all in bed with one another that it just irritates me. It's like, does anybody have any different ideas or going to bring anything different to the table? Or are you all in line with what the county and city are saying? Because those people, they help pay your salary directly with funds, So it's like I get tired of it.
Well, Joe, let me just say this, man. I really do appreciate you. This conversation has been inspiring. We hope to have you back, man, on the leadership table, man, sometime in the near future. I want to thank you personally, man, for sharing your story, your experiences, and your leadership wisdom with us today. For all of our listeners, leadership is not about titles or positions. It's about service, courage, and staying true to the people that you represent. That's something we've heard loud and clear from Joe today. I'm Dr. Kevin Hairston, and this has been the Leadership Table Podcast. Until the next time, remember, leadership is not about being at the head of the table. It's about making sure that everybody gets a seat at the table. God bless you, and until the next time, keep the faith.
Foxland Media, think big.